Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really honored to get to work with the Together for Choice group and share some of what we think are the best practices in special needs financial planning. And as my colleague Randy had indicated when she passed information on to Ashley, I grew up as a child of David Letterman, loving top 10 lists. So we have a top 10 list on our website for lots of different areas of planning, but this is kind of the overall, kind of the 30,000 foot thing that most families should be thinking about. And as you all know, living in the special needs world, we all have to do more. So our top 10 list actually has 11 items we're going to cover today. And I know it's a lot to cover in 60 minutes. The format we'd like to share with you will be that I'll introduce each of the 11 topics, mention one special thing about it and why it's important, and then offer up to you all, the community, one question related to that topic, which Randy, my associate, is going to pick and ask me live. If there's multiple questions that come in, or if you think of a question after we moved on to another topic, not a problem. We'll leave some time at the end to kind of go back and catch up on more questions. And we recognize that 60 minutes is probably not enough time to do justice to all these different things. We apologize for that. We'll share our contact information at the end. If you want to reach out with a specific question or need more information, we're happy to provide that to you. But we really do appreciate the opportunity. And with that, I'll get into our presentation. So 50 years as a sibling with a loved one with autism, been the joy of my life. My brother is actually the main impetus why we started Oak Wealth Advisors over 15 years ago. It's really to help families like yours and ours make better decisions with all the planning you have. As you can see on that slide, we've been very, very fortunate to receive lots of positive feedback from different organizations that think highly of what we're doing. And that includes Together for Choice, who's given us the opportunity to speak with you today. So the one thing I want to start with before we get into the details is the issue of how we're going to communicate about people with disabilities. Sometimes I'll use the word disability. Sometimes I'll use special needs. It's not meant to offend anybody, but odds are over the next 60 minutes, I'll find some way with language to offend everyone in some way, and I apologize for that. We're also going to use person-first language in most cases. If we're meeting with you and your family one-on-one, we would use identity-first language if that's what you prefer, or person-first language if that's what you prefer. But in a group setting, we find that typically using person-first language consistently is the best practice. For those of you who have a loved one who really identifies with their diagnosis and wants to put that out front and center, by all means, that's their privilege and right, and they should do that. But for today, we're going to use person-first language. So let's go. The number one planning tip, not in any order, but it's to do what you guys are already doing. Seek other families who've got similar challenges, both locally and nationally. Some of the planning you're going to do will have a national focus, accessing governmental benefits that are done at the federal level. Other things are much more local. Who are the local resource providers, agencies, and other support groups that you want to tap into for their expertise? So that's really the very first thing that every family should do. And I'll point out to you that as we go through these 11 tips, not all 11 will apply to every person on this webinar. You need to think about what's most appropriate for your family. Speak with the other key members of your planning team, whether that's a financial advisor or an attorney, both, whomever it is you trust with advice. Talk to them about which of these elements should be in your plan. Randy, any questions about seeking other families to connect with?
Nope, not yet. We're good.
Didn't expect one on this one, but okay. Kind of a generic way to start. We all feel good. We got number one checked off. We're doing that. So nice start for everybody, probably. Number two, get registered for all the services and benefits your loved one's entitled to receive. This gets a little bit more state specific. I know that Together for Choice serves a national community. Every state and even every community is going to have different opportunities. It's really important to do step one so you're aware of what might be available in step two. Because for this, we want to make sure if there's income benefits, healthcare benefits, food benefits, we're getting those. We also want to make sure that there's programs locally. Every state's unique. I'll point out in Illinois, we have an incredible system through our parks and recreation programs around the state called special recreation, where literally every person's tax dollars from the real estate taxes goes to support special recreation programs. It's unique to the state of Illinois, but if you move here from somewhere else, it might take you years to figure out those things exist. Part of that community discussion is learning what opportunities are available for you locally. Randy, anything on this one?
Nope, we're good.
All right. Number three, be aware of why people with disabilities get denied means-tested benefits. there's really two aspects to this one. The first part is, why might you be denied when you initially apply for benefits? And for many of you, I know you probably already have that in place. The question is then, why do you lose benefits in the future? Let's start with the first aspect first. When we go to apply with our loved one to get means-tested benefits, which would be Medicaid and SSI primarily, and then obviously SNAP as well at age 22. When we're applying for those means-tested benefits, the three main ways that people get denied, and there's roughly a 2/3 denial rate on initial applications. The three ways are: one, the person has more than $2,000 of resources in their own name. Everyone can own a house and a car, but then beyond that, it's really $2,000 of other financial assets. And that can be anything. It can be a savings bond. It can be a joint checking account with a parent with their names on it. It's all deemed to be available to the individual. So if that account had more than $2,000 on it on the day the government looks in reviewing your application, your loved one's going to be denied. So we're going to make sure we don't have excess assets in the individual's name at the time of application. The other two things are more soft answers to the questions that get you denied. One of which is, how many people are in the individual's household who's applying for means-tested benefits? This trips up lots of well-meaning families. Well, they'll say, well, our loved one lives with us. There's 4 of us in the house. So the answer is 4. That's the wrong answer. I hope all of you know from prior presentations you've heard from us or others, the answer to the household size, the individual applying for benefits, is 1. They're looking at, does this person on their own need the services and dollars available from the government? And if they have to support themselves, that's all we're looking at is, can they on their own support themselves at a meaningful level? The answer is no, they'll get benefits. If they're now looking at the entire family of 4, the odds are it's going to be no, because then every member is going to have to qualify, and they're not going to. Therefore, you'll be denied. So be careful with the household size being 1 at the time of application. The other thing that's interesting is the government looks at 2 elements of determining whether someone is disabled. Those 2 things are, is there medical documentation to prove a disability? I'm assuming you're going to have that when you go and apply. The second one is, can you earn a certain amount of money, at which point the government says you're self-sufficient? Well, if they think you can earn that amount of money, then they're going to deny you benefits because they want to give the benefits, the financial benefits, to those who can't support themselves. So it's really important there to not over-exaggerate your loved one's skills. We obviously want to build up our loved one's skills as we're talking with them, as we're seeking services and supports for them, helping them launch as successful adults. That's absolutely true. For that one moment, when you're in front of the Social Security office applying for benefits, it's a time to never embellish. Tell the truth, but point out the shortcomings, point out the challenges. Have the medical doctor reference the things they've seen in their care that would cause a person to likely not be able to keep a job at a significant level for a significant period of time. With that documentation and proper answers, your odds of getting benefits goes way up. And then what happens? How do people lose the benefits once they have them? Well, there's 2 main ways we're seeing. One of which is the government just flat cuts you for no reason. And you'll get a denial letter. Hey, you know what? Your benefits have been seized due to our records. If nothing has changed, if your loved one's not all of a sudden earning more money, or there's not all of a sudden more money in the account taking their asset level above 2,000, it's probably an error. But I can't tell you how many families get that letter and assume they did something wrong and they're no longer entitled to benefits. The government's happy to not pay them. And in fact, I would argue the government looks at ways to remove people from the programs as opposed to looking for ways to add them. There's some current movement right now that's going to make that better. But the reality is we want to be careful to look at those letters in detail and figure out, why was my child taken off of benefits? If we don't understand the reason why, we're going to contact the office and say, nothing has changed. Why are these benefits being taken away? And then if there's nothing there, hopefully we can get back on. But the key is to communicate back quickly with the Social Security office, asking the question about why. The other thing is simply the assets creep in. You've got families where, especially at the end of last year, there's a situation where the January payment of Social Security benefits was going to get pulled into December of 2023. Has to do with the way the calendar year ended and which day was the first of the year. Ended up being a weekend, I believe, and it pushed it back to the day before, which pushed it into the prior month. When that happens, we're at risk if we've got some dollars sitting in a savings account having that account at the end of the month be overfunded, be over $2,000 because we just got that next supplemental security income payment hitting the account on December 31st. So we want to watch and make sure we don't have too many assets accumulating at the end of the month when the government looks at the account balances. And those are the reasons why people typically either don't get or lose their benefits. Any questions around that, Randy?
Yes, we have two questions.
Pick
If
one.
if someone is getting Social Security disability insurance, is the maximum the same? This individual was told that there is no maximum.
Great question. When I was referring to the $2,000 asset limit, that applies to individuals who are receiving the means tested benefits. The means tested benefits group would be supplemental security income, SSI, and Medicaid. If you're receiving disability income, which is SSDI, typically that comes along with Medicare for your health insurance, and you can have both sets. But if you're at the higher level, the Medicare and the SSDI, then all of a sudden the asset limit goes away. We're not worried about that if we're not going to need SSI in the future. And there's some chance that if you lose your job, if the SSI benefits go away for some reason, you might need SSI and you might need Medicaid. Well, if that's the case, you want to continue to plan carefully around the asset limit and use some other techniques we're going to talk about in these other 11 tips to make sure that there's resources there, but they're not countable resources. So correct, SSDI beneficiaries do not have an asset limit. So for any of us, if we become disabled, no matter how much wealth we've accumulated, we can get on SSDI very quickly after losing our jobs and our ability to work. They're not going to be asset tested. Thank you for that question.
Can I ask one more?
All right, quickly.
All right. For a household of one, can we do share household expenses, or do we need to charge them rent?
Okay. The question, I think, is broader than specifically reason why people get denied benefits, but the question comes down to how we lose maybe a third. There's something called in-kind support and maintenance. Not really part of this presentation today, but an in-kind support and maintenance deduction is done if the person's received certain goods and services that the government is paying for with the SSI and Medicaid dollars. Those things are essentially basic healthcare and shelter. It used to include food. As of this month, April 2024, it no longer includes food. That was just something that came out just this week. So you can give your loved one as much food, groceries as you want. It's not going to cause them to lose any benefits. The housing part, though, if you're giving them free room and board, they're going to lose roughly 1/3 of their SSI amount. Now, there's two ways around that. One of which is simply to charge rent of at least the amount they're losing. In some states, that's got to be the fair market value, which could be well over $1,000, which is problematic because SSI is only paying $943. But you can charge them rent at the fair market value of the space, or excuse me, you can have them pay what's called their fair share of the overhead related to housing. You get to kind of a similar number either way. In both cases, you've got to document what's being paid. But if the person is sharing in their cost of living in that household, then they get the full $943 SSI benefit with no in-kind support and maintenance deduction. So that'd be a good planning tip. Thank you for asking the question because it's not on this list, I don't believe, with respect to things to be thinking about. But that allows you to maximize the SSI value by having the individual, him or herself, pay in at least $350 to $400 a month in rent. And there's obviously ways around how you have to pick up taxation on that if you're the landlord, the parent. That's beyond the scope of today's discussion, though. But that's something to talk about with your planning team, is does it make sense to pay rent, and how are we gonna deal with that from a tax perspective? Okay, number 4. One of the solutions to having more resources available for our loved ones when we're trying to keep their assets under $2,000 is to use a special needs trust. It's truly the cornerstone to planning. That does not mean that 100% of all people with a diagnosis need to have a special needs trust. But in most cases, it facilitates a lot of the other planning. It becomes the primary place where people are going to say, well, I'm going to leave one half of my assets to my child without a disability. My other half is going to go to the special needs trust for the individual who has a diagnosis. That allows them to remain eligible for those means tested benefits because the special needs trust could have any amount of value of assets in it. And it's not going to jeopardize those means tested benefits. They look beyond the special needs trust for $2,000 somewhere else. Special needs trust is not counted at all. It also is a great way to make sure your loved one never gets taken advantage of financially. If the vast majority of all their financial resources are tied up in a special needs trust, nobody is going to be able to have them give them all their money or trick them into buying things or doing things like that that would cause that value to significantly decrease without it benefiting your loved one. With a special needs trust, only the trustee can determine if a distribution will be made. They will listen to the beneficiary and the beneficiary's loved ones about their needs, but it's left up to that trustee specifically to make all distribution decisions. So it's a great protection element in your planning, as well as a way to amass more resources to support your loved one beyond that $2,000 limit and what the government provides. And those are really the key elements. There's lots more to special needs trusts. And I know that Together for Choice will host future sessions specifically about special needs trusts. But the key thing there is to have those trusts drafted by someone who's an expert in doing this kind of special needs law planning, because you want to make sure that when the government looks at the trust, and they will, that it meets their description of a true special needs trust. If there's language in there that an attorney who doesn't specialize in the area put in there because it's standard in most other trusts, it may disqualify it from the Social Security Department's review. And then all of a sudden, whatever dollars in there count towards that $2,000 limit. And now your loved one's just lost benefits. So it's very important to have it drafted by an expert who knows how to draft for the government's review. Questions on special needs trusts?
Can you talk about what restrictions exist for using special needs trust monies?
Great. I love this question, and we'll circle back to more trust questions at the end. But years ago, we saw a lot of trust documents that would be very narrowly written so that it said the trustee can only expend money for things that are not, and there's a long list. It included food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. So you look at that and you say, okay, it's drafted so narrowly, what can I spend it on? Well, technology, travel, entertainment things, that's a pretty narrow bucket. The smarter drafting we've seen more recently gives the trustee free discretion. Now, there's certain things I mentioned, in-kind support and maintenance. That term means that if the trust or a parent is paying directly for those things for the individual with the diagnosis, there's a risk that they're going to lose 1/3 of their monthly SSI benefit. In some cases, we don't care. We would much rather have that person living in a safer, better housing situation, having the trust pay $2,500 a month for that. Oh, that's a disqualifying distribution for ISM purposes. Yes, it is. But now your loved one's living in a better place. Fine. So their benefit from SSI drops down from $943 down to $629. Okay, they're still getting $629. What they're not going to have happen is losing all of it. They won't. They'll lose 1/3. And if the trust can afford to pay $2,000 a month more for the housing, that's a good distribution, even though it technically generates the in-kind support and maintenance reduction. So we believe that the trust should be written to allow trustee discretion, and we want to make sure we're using a trustee who fully understands the consequences of those distributions. I mentioned food just went away as an ISM part of the calculation. So if the trust was drafted to say you can't use it to buy food, that's a problem because the trustee now can't use it to buy groceries for that individual. But arguably, as of April 2024, that's not going to be a problem. So it's too bad the trust was drafted that narrowly, because now the trustee with the rules in place can't do it, even though it wouldn't cause any loss of benefits and it's what the individual needs. So we want to make sure we're using attorneys who draft smartly with the process, because the trust can pay for most things. There's just some consequences that come for things that might cause an ISM reduction. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which is ABLE accounts, which happens to be the other planning resource we have available in having assets accumulate for our loved ones for their benefit without jeopardizing their access to means-tested benefits. We can have an infinite amount of money in a trust, and we can have up to $100,000 in an ABLE account. And neither of those two balances are going to affect SSI and Medicaid. Now, the ABLE account above $100,000 starts to count. So at $100,000 and $100, we now have $100 towards that $2,000 limit. So the incremental amount above $100,000 will count as a resource. So the obvious planning there is let's not let the ABLE account go anything close to $100,000 if we need our means tested benefits for the foreseeable future. If we've got a loved one who's on SSDI and will never need SSI and Medicaid, fine. You can still have an ABLE account, and all of a sudden that $100,000 limit isn't so important. An ABLE account, unlike a trust, does not pay income taxes. It's similar to a Roth IRA, if you're familiar with that, where it's going to grow and distributions from it are both tax-free. So it's a wonderful savings opportunity. Also for our loved ones who are more able, it gives them an account they can access to use for spending. Most ABLE account programs come with a debit card, so it gives them access to the funds that have been saved for them that they can then use safely. And that debit card is going to then create a record so that if the government ever says where all the money is in your ABLE account spent solely for your benefit, you can print out and show them, yes, these are the expenses, these are all for me. It wasn't like I took 6 people to a football game and bought all tickets with my debit card. I just bought my ticket for the event. So ABLE accounts create flexibility for those who are able to manage it. They could be at risk if, let's say, you had $50 or $60 or $80,000 in your ABLE account and your loved one was coerced by someone else to spend things for things they're not supposed to. Your individual, it's their account. There is no trustee on this. They're their own account holder, so they could be taken advantage of to the extent of the assets in the ABLE account. So give that some thought. In some cases with our loved ones where there's maybe not as much ability, if there's more challenges, an ABLE account can be managed by the parent, who then can control and make distributions as needed for their loved one. But the ABLE account is a wonderful planning opportunity, especially when we talk about that month-end balance, right? That must stay below $2,000 in the individual's name. So as we're getting SSI payments, we need to spend that. If we have a situation where maybe there's back pay coming from the government, or maybe there's a special gift that came in for a birthday or a holiday, and all of a sudden that savings account's well above $2,000, we can take that excess money and put it into the ABLE account. Anyone can fund an ABLE account. The limit is the annual gifting exclusion amount per year. So this year we're looking at $18,000. That's the most that all sources can put into an ABLE account during the calendar year of 2024. And that amount is indexed every year for inflation. So in 2025, we'll have a new number, but for 2024, that limit is $18,000 of total contributions from any source into that account. So the best planning tip with an ABLE account for funding would be, let's wait till closer to the end of the year. If we want to maximize it and put $18,000 in, let's not do that until around Thanksgiving or even later. Because if there's a need to get other monies pushed in there that fell into that loved one's name from a gift, possibly year-end holidays, we want to make sure there's still room to put money in there before year end without crossing over $18,000. Because at that point, the money's got to be given back, and that could be a problem. So $18,000 is the annual gift amount in. Above $100,000, it starts to count as an asset available to the individual. But other than that, the ABLE account's a wonderful additional resource, like a special needs trust, to hold resources for our loved one. Questions on ABLE accounts?
No, I'm fielding several questions, but the most recent one, just so everybody knows, if you don't have a special needs trust, but you do have an ABLE account, can an ABLE fund be used for social purposes? And I am responding absolutely yes, yes, yes. Special needs dance classes, whatever. Yes,
Right.
It's got broad flexibility. Yes,
So
I do it.
Let me track back to the last question on the trust. What can a trust be spent for? Well, while a trust might have certain challenges if it pays for certain things, it'll trigger that in-kind support and maintenance. The ABLE account laws were written differently. An ABLE account can literally be used for anything for that loved one's benefit. Does that mean housing, Mike? Yeah, it does. What about medical care that's not covered by insurance? Yes. What about groceries? Uh-huh. So anything that might have otherwise triggered an ISM penalty can be paid for out of the ABLE account. So if you got resources in both, and you need to have it paid for, and you know if the trust pays for it or if the parents pay for it, we're gonna have a reduction in Social Security benefits from SSI. Let's use the ABLE dollars to pay for it. Much broader distribution ability. And you can actually have a trust under current law. Again, always check with your attorneys. You can have a current trust distribute to the ABLE account and have the able account pay the bill. So it's kind of a conduit planning opportunity where maybe there'd be a problem with the trust paying for something directly. Have it distribute to the able account first. Able account's got broader distribution rules. Let the able account pay for it. You sidestep the limitation on the trust paying for it. Okay. That's kind of planning 201, not 101 like the rest of this, but just wanted to put that out there. So for those of you who have both these accounts, you can maximize the benefit of both. Okay. This next topic is so frustrating for us as professional financial advisors to families. Beneficiary designations are so important. Many families think that if their will says, upon my death, all my assets go into a special needs trust for my loved one, that they've taken care of all their planning and all their assets will go into the trust. Nothing could be further from the truth. The will take care of assets that don't have a beneficiary designation. And for many of us, if we have life insurance, if we have retirement plans, things like IRA accounts, 401k accounts, 403bs, other pension plans, those types of accounts often have large dollar amounts in them, and they all have beneficiary designations. The beneficiary designation will take precedence over your will when you die. So in the more humorous situation, if you have an ex-spouse and the ex-spouse was named on your IRA account years ago and you didn't update it and you die, that ex-spouse is getting all the assets in that IRA account, not your new spouse or your kids. So it's very important to review the beneficiary designations and make sure not just that you sent in what you prefer, but that you see that that plan sponsor for the investment account or the insurance carrier actually has it in their records. Review it online, ask for a printout, see what they have in their documents, because at the end of the day, you're dead. And you can't change it once you're dead. So it's very important that whoever's going to be managing your estate and making those distributions has the correct people and or trusts in place to receive your assets when you're gone. So review those very, very carefully. And there's another term of art on an individual or a joint savings account. We often see families who don't want to go to the hassle of setting up a trust right away, use a transfer on death account. And so instead of setting up a special needs trust right away, they'll say, I'm going to keep all the assets in our names. And upon death, we'll simply have a TOD, a transfer on death, that will be similar to putting a beneficiary designation on an account that otherwise wouldn't have one. So it keeps it out of their estate. It goes immediately into the special needs trust. Even though it's not a retirement account, even though it's not an insurance plan, you can basically add beneficiaries to accounts that specifically will dictate where the assets go when you die. So both account titles and beneficiary designations are super important and will supersede anything else in your estate plan with respect to how the assets move when you die. Questions about that one?
No.
Okay, good. Number 7, you guys are doing this today. You know, hopefully the people that are on this call are also in relationships socially with other people within Together for Choice, where you're learning from each other. You're all helping. You're all advocating for the things that you want for your loved ones. That's fantastic. In addition, find who are the fiduciary advisors in your community, whether that's going to be a law firm, an agency, a financial planning services firm that happens to be a fiduciary model, which is maybe 5 to 10% of all of them. The big ones you typically see advertising are not fiduciaries. That means they're basically in the selling mode of, we want to help your family by selling products to you that are maybe necessarily in your best interest, but it helps us pay our bills. You want fiduciaries, people who have to, by law, do what's in your family's best interest. And if you have people like that in your support team, helping you with making decisions and helping you find resources, you're going to have much greater success. And a lot of this plays to communication, right? Sometimes in our community, people are really shy about sharing what their challenges are. If you're willing to share and people hear about what you're looking for, you're much more likely to find those answers more quickly and more efficiently than if you try to do it all yourself. So really bring in the community and work with people who have things aligned with your interests in your planning. Questions about that?
No.
Future caregivers. Okay. I'm going to suggest that probably 85 to 90% of the families we meet with come in with a plan that when mom and dad are dead, the sibling will take care of the loved one with a disability. That, for most families, is a horrific plan, but that's what they have because it's the easiest answer, and hopefully that loved one wants to play the role. In our experience, maybe 1/3 of all siblings want to have nothing to do with their sibling with the diagnosis because they feel like they've been left out, they've been disadvantaged because more of the attention went to the loved one with the disability, and they're just exhausted with the whole thing and they want to be out of it. So that third's not going to be a very good choice. There's another probably 50% who are very happy to play a role, but not daily caregiving. And so writing them into the plan in some capacity is really a good idea, but expecting them to do everything, to be the trustee, to be the caregiver, to possibly be a guardian if that's a need for your family. That's asking an awful lot of another person who likely has their own family, their own life, and doesn't have 24/7 to devote to their sibling, which leaves maybe another 10 to 15%. And maybe that group could be a caregiver. They might be single. They might live in the same community. They might have a great relationship with their loved one. But the reality is the typical caregiver only lasts 2 to 3 years in that career. So think about that. Obviously, the love of the sibling might keep them there longer, but they're often not getting paid. The challenges are huge. And emotionally, if they're the caregiver, what happens to that sibling relationship? That's a really valuable thing to leave behind, is keeping siblings with sibling relationships. And if you change the dynamic, where there's now a power differential, that's going to change the relationship. So we strongly encourage that families seek out not one, but multiple potential future caregivers. Not easy, we understand that. But if you've got a list of agencies and other support organizations that could play a role, allowing siblings and other family members to then supervise that and make hiring and firing decisions for the loved one who's being cared for, that's a much better solution. Yes, it's more expensive, but it allows that sibling to stay in a sibling relationship, and that is invaluable. And so it takes more planning, it takes more time, and we understand, much like the reason why you have 11 tips and not 10, you're already doing more as is than most families with respect to your planning. And yes, that's another thing you have to deal with, but I think it's critical as a planning tip to make you aware that just naming a relative or a sibling is a poor choice. In my own family circumstances, for the longest time, my parents had named a distant relative to be the primary caregiver for my brother, who doesn't need a lot of care and oversight, but someone's got to be checking in at least daily, if not more frequently, with my brother to make sure things are staying on track. Well, those individuals happen to be about 15 to 20 years older than my brother. So at the time my parents passed away, which is probably in the next decade, my brother will be in his late 50s to early 60s, which means those caregivers are going to be in their mid to late 70s. At which time they're going to have their own senior living issues to be dealing with, not providing daily care for my brother. So that was a really poor decision on my parents' part to never update that. That's since been taken care of. But the reality is people will name relatives or siblings to do this, and it's just not the optimal decision. So find caregivers in your community. If there aren't any, think about whether or not that's the best place for your loved one to live long term. It may not be, and that brings up a whole other set of issues, but finding a caregiver outside the family is a really important step. Questions about caregiving?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. Well, I needed a sip of water there, so I wish we had a question. All right, next one. Prepare a guide. So what's probably percolating in your head is, gosh, this is a lot of stuff. And you're right, it is. And the caregiving element and the future support people, those are all ideas that parents are going to have. And it's probably written on a piece of paper or put in a note somewhere, or it's online. But the important thing is for all that information, whatever's in a parent's head about that loved one, especially if that loved one is not able to communicate their own needs, wants, and wishes, is to get it documented. We call our document a special needs care guide. Others will call it a letter of intent. What this document is a non-legal, non-binding document. So separate from your estate plan, separate from the trusts, but a separate document that's going to be then available to those who will provide the care, the daily care, the longer term planning, all those things the parents are typically doing for their loved one for as long as they possibly can. And all of you know there's a lot of things in your head about your loved one that only you know. Despite your best communication with friends and relatives, there's still stuff that if you have to do it daily, there's little nuances. Those are things we want to capture. So in a care guide, you want to have information about prior medications that might have been problematic, medications you've never tried, and medications that you're using effectively. Similarly, with respect to the medical community, doctors you visited and didn't like, or that had issues with respect to the team of doctors that might be part of the plan. Those that are successful, and those you have heard about but have never pursued. Create that list so that someone stepping into your shoes knows where to go to get the right medical information for your loved one. And then take that same tact with every other element of your loved one's plan. Caregivers, housing, everything. Obviously, with Together for Choice, one of the leading organizations in the country around housing. What's neat about them and why we love partnering with them is that they don't believe one size fits all, nor do we. There are no two people who are exactly alike, and therefore their needs are going to be different. And unfortunately, all of us have evolving needs. Think about how many times you may have moved in your lifetime. Now, how many families do you think we've met with who say, oh yeah, when we're gone, our loved one's going to live here for the rest of their life, which could be 50 years. That's incredibly unrealistic. So what we want to do is say, okay, we think these are the 3 best housing opportunities for our loved one, maybe 2 initially. Beyond that, we'd want to look at these other ones. And if we don't know what the names of those other ones are, you can still list out characteristics that someone helping your loved one when mom and dad are gone can look at and say, okay, these are the priorities. We want this, this, and this. Safety, access to public transportation, and maybe a quiet environment. If those are the 3 most important things, document them so that someone else helping your loved one knows what those priorities should be when seeking future housing locations. And that goes for other things as well. What are the daily activities of living? What do they do during the day if they're not working? How does that change on a weekend? Who do they want to be around? Who do they not want to be around? Those kinds of things are important. There might be people and organizations that are reaching out and a future caregiver might not know any better and say, okay, yeah, we'll put you in that program. Well, if the person hates it, but maybe can't communicate that effectively, that's not a good answer. That goes in the guide. So think of the guide as the parent's mental brain download. We want all those elements to be documented so that future support members of your loved one's team have the information they need to make the best possible decisions and to keep the level of care at or as close to what was in place before the parents died. Okay, that's what we want for our care guide. So it's kind of a free-flowing document. We have one that you can download from our website. It's a template. There are no answers to it, but it gives you the guidelines and the framework for putting information down into a document. We think going forward, people will move away from a single document to more of a Google Doc type format where you put in different elements in a folder and you can share those folders out with different people with different passwords. There's a for-profit organization that's called Vest Life, and Randy can put that in the chat. But Vest Life is a for-profit organization that a number of our clients have used successfully to kind of compartmentalize this planning and allow families to put a bunch of information out there in a safe directory and then share it only as needed with the people who might need access to the information. So similar to a Google Doc where they're sharing and updating, you can use a third-party software like that. But getting it done is hard. Randy, if she was leading this presentation, would tell you it takes 3 things. Those 3 things would be, Randy, you tell them.
Okay, I'm unmuted. 3 really important things are if you're a drinker, quite a bit of alcohol. And if you're not a drinker, that's okay too. Find your passion. Quite a bit of Kleenex because it's pretty traumatic having to create a care plan and a roadmap for your loved one's future, knowing that you will not be a part of it. It's scary. It's not something that we should be doing, but it's something that we've all been planning for, and I'm in your boat as well. So I've been planning for this as well. Chocolate, an enormous amount of chocolate. If chocolate is not your passion, find another passion, but mine would happen to be a few Snickers bars here and there. So.
All right, so obviously very detailed information there for preparing your care guide from Randy, as always. But that's the helpful element of the reality. It's hard. Care guides are emotionally challenging to create, but they're also essential and maybe the most important and most valuable thing you leave behind when you're gone. So even though it's number 9 on our list, and hopefully you're still paying attention, it's a really important one to pursue.
Excuse me, Mike, can we talk real quickly about what a professional fiduciary would do or,
Let's keep that for the end because now we're out of
okay,
order, but we'll come back to
got it.
fiduciaries. Thank you
Okay,
for that.
yep.
Now let's get to the last couple here. Number 10, coordination. As we talked about with the care guide, it's only as valuable as the number of people that know it exists, right? Too often we see that families do a wonderful job. They spend a lot of money with an attorney drafting a great set of estate planning documents with a special needs trust. They open the ABLE account. They've gotten the government resources in place. They've got a safe location for the person to live in. And it's all siloed within that immediate family's knowledge base. Then a well-meaning relative decides to drop a $50,000 or $100,000 or more inheritance on your loved one directly. Well, now all that great planning you did to have the trust be there gets ruined by the fact your loved one now has assets in their own name. We need to then scramble and get what's called a self-settled trust, which is similar to the third-party special needs trust that we were talking about earlier, which is funded by other people. Well, a self-settled trust would allow you to get the same access to means-tested benefits as the third-party trust funded by other people's money, but that's what you have to fund if the person gets money in their own name. In that self-settled trust, the government is the next beneficiary if the person dies. So if a well-meaning relative leaves money, significant money, to your loved one, and it goes into that self-settled trust so they can maintain their benefits, if they die with assets remaining in there, and they receive Medicaid services over the course of their lifetime, the government gets the first access to all the remaining assets in that specific trust. So, solution, coordinate. Tell the relatives, hey, don't know if you're planning on leaving anything to our son or our daughter, but if you do, please don't give it to them directly. Put it in the name of the special needs trust for the benefit of our child. By doing that, you make sure that they have access to the resources you want to leave them and they don't jeopardize their benefits. It can be as nuanced as that. You don't have to give them all the specifics and details and law and regulations. Just let them know that here's the name of the special needs trust. You should use that if you want to gift to them. And oftentimes the law firm you work with in drafting the document will give you language you can share with relatives. But it's really important they know that you've gone through all this planning. Same thing with the care guide. It's great if you draft it, but if it's in some drawer in a folder and nobody knows it exists, that's a lot of drinking, chocolate eating, and tissue using that's for naught because the people who need to actually implement the care guide don't know it exists. So we want to make sure we're always communicating with the relatives, especially if they're going to play a role in the future or might want to leave a gift at some point in the future, about what the most efficient way is to do that to really get the benefit that they want and that you want for your loved one. Any questions there?
No.
Okay. The last one. This one gets a little bit more emotional. So creating a safety plan. I think many of you have been told by your schools, when your kids are toddlers, hey, you should, go through a practice or a simulation at home. What if you have a fill in the blank? Obviously, for those of you living in California, maybe it's going to be, water issues or fire issues that could hit your house from natural disasters in the area. In the Midwest, you've got more tornadoes. In the Gulf area, you've got flooding and, hurricanes coming in along Florida and the East Coast. Depending on what your challenge is, even more basic things, just the alarm going off in the house, what do you do? Walk through that with your loved one at home, but also reach out to the first responders in your community and let them know that the loved one you're living with has these challenges. Here's what they look like. Here's what they might do in the event of an emergency.
Excuse me, Mike.
Yes.
Could I just say one thing? A lot of times in your community or part of the fire department or police department, they'll have some sort of information that can be filled out, like some sort of special needs and or disability roadmap or a quick 2-page guide that gives you the opportunity to document a little bit about your loved one, and then they'll keep that on file. They might ask you to upload or provide a current picture of your child, so that if they wander, if there's an issue, if they have difficulties with being approached, there are certain techniques and tools that maybe you can document in that roadmap or guide that will assist them moving forward if indeed there is an issue.
Right. And we would suggest that when possible, have your loved one go and visit.
Yes.
What's the police department look like? What do firemen look like when they're coming to the house? so that's not quite as traumatic an experience for them if it actually happens. There's nothing worse than seeing a news story where an individual who may have had a mental health crisis gets shot accidentally because the first responders didn't know that, and they were acting out something they'd seen on TV and might have had a play gun or maybe had their hands in the shape of a gun, and the first responder panicked and shot them. That's an avoidable situation. Or in my own family circumstance, this is where it's not quite so funny, but everybody did survive, I'll tell you that. So it's a 2-story house. My parents had been through the planning with my brother, who at the time was in his 30s, about here's what happens if we have a fire. Okay, but they understood that. Fire alarms, everything is working effectively. So major smoke fire from electrical fire in the basement. Smoke starting to billow up, covering the first floor, heading to the second floor. My parents scream up to my brother, who's watching golf on TV, and he happens to be autistic, and he loves golf more than anything in the world. So they yell to him, hey, fire, get out of the house. Get out of the house now. You've got to go. My parents run outside, call 911. First responders are there very quickly. And my parents are like, where in the heck is Sean? Why is he not out here? We yelled at him. The fire's getting pretty bad. What do we do? First responders, put on their mask, get their tanks going, run in the house. Where is he? He's gonna be upstairs. They get there. The alarm is still shrieking. The smoke is now on the second floor. They get him outside safely. I said, why did you not go outside? What were you doing? He goes, golf was on. He was so focused on the golf, he could care less that it was becoming more difficult to breathe, that there's a piercingly loud alarm going off in the house, because he was focused on golf on TV, and that was his number one thing. Don't let that happen in your family. Help the first responders know that, hey, in the event of an emergency, that person may not respond despite the training we've done, and will need your help to do this or that. And then obviously run through more detailed scenarios that my parents did initially, like, hey, I don't care what you're doing or what you're watching, you have to leave the house. And so, if that last parting tip saves one person's life on this call or their family's life, we've done our job today. But really important again there to communicate with your first responders. Here's what the challenges might be, and update that. If your kids' skills get better or if they digress, let them know. Have them meet the people. Have them see your loved one as being a member of the community that they can look out for even when you're not in the house. It's just a great relationship to build up. Questions about that?
No.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. Before we jump into all the other questions, I'll do 2 last housekeeping things. One of which is to share with you that we've got resources on our website, on a YouTube channel. We've got a podcast. So if you search for Oak Wealth Advisors, you can find lots of other free information about planning. It's not about us, it's about you and what you need for your planning needs. So come and grab the information off our website. There's a special needs resources page specifically for families to get what they need. Go look at YouTube, look for the videos there if you want more information without me talking. That's a great way to get that. And look at the podcast. We've now got, I believe, 4 that have been posted, and there's more coming out every month on a going forward basis with really great thought leadership in the special needs community that you can access for free. And then disclosures, as I said initially, some of that may not apply to you. Nothing I said should be implemented without talking with your own planning team. And I'll leave this up for additional questions. You can reach out to Randy and me and our team here at Oak Wealth Advisors. Our headquarters is in Northbrook. We have 3 offices around the country. That main phone number there, the 945-8888, will reach us. And if there's someone with more local knowledge we need to refer you to, we'll get you to that person. And if there's an attorney you need to find in the state, and it's not the state we're in, we also have abilities to make references and referrals out for that. So with that, I'll take any further questions you guys have.